Our Learn and Grow speaker today is Dr. Alexander Jendrusina. He's faculty and staff counseling consultation office and a professor of psychology at the University of Michigan. He also spent many years at the Ann Arbor VA, so well experienced from Ann Arbor and also from Chicago for many years. His research and clinical work focus on psychological well-being, discrimination, diversity-related training programs, workshops, and how to improve health for patients in underrepresented communities. His talk today is focused on practical tips for stress management, cognitive behavior therapies, mindfulness, depression, race-related issues, and just living transitions and stress management. He will have plenty of time to talk. He has questions, so there will be some opportunities for audience engagement. So you'll be able to participate and then also ask questions at the end of his talk. So please welcome Dr. Jendrusina.
Should be able to do it. If you want a spotlight, you can do that if you need to.
Okay,
We'll give it a whirl, make sure.
let's just test. There we go. Okay. Hi everyone, my name's Alex Jendrusina. Thank you for the lovely introduction. I work as a counselor at FASCO, so again we'll be talking a bit about what FASCO is as a refresher and maybe new information for everyone. Thanks for having me here today. I'm going to be talking about some tips for stress management, and certainly there's a lot of stress in life, and so I think this is always a timely topic and a good thing to talk about. So we'll talk about some specific strategies that you can hopefully try on your own, and again some concrete ideas. Okay, so just getting started here, I'd like to review the FASCO services. So retirees are eligible for FASCO services, and that's something that not people always know about, so that's important for us to discuss today. And then after we do a brief overview of the FASCO services, we'll start our stress management conversation. So we'll start off talking about signs of stress and identifying your own signs. We'll learn about some action-based tools for you to learn and try on your own. We'll review some other things around stress like biological considerations, and then we'll talk about some general principles. So what are some overarching ideas that maybe you want to keep in mind when you're coming up with your own stress management tools. Okay. So to give you, I heard what was the acronym. So faculty and staff counseling and consultation office. Faculty and staff counseling and consultation office. It's a bit of a mouthful, so we'll call it FASCO from now on. Okay, so we can provide support with a variety of different concerns. These are some of them that you see. So general kind of maybe things that are stressors in life, family interpersonal conflicts, emotional health, things related to substance use, other emotional concerns. So again, we support people with a variety of different challenges that they might be facing. Okay. Our services, so we offer assessment, referrals, and short-term counseling. So we are a short-term type of counseling model. One of the really good things that I think we've always been doing, but particularly during the pandemic that we've been able to do, is to get people connected to services in the community. If you yourself or you know of anyone that's tried to get counseling services during this time, it can be really hard to get in places. There can be wait lists. And so we offer referral services where we can help people get connected. Other things that we do, so just like today, we do a number of presentations throughout the semester for people focused on mental health, emotional health, or different things related to like goal setting. We have clinicians who are both master's and PhD levels. I'm trained as a clinical psychologist. And in terms of our services, so people are eligible for up to 5 sessions. So we work with you for up to 5 sessions. Again, we're short term. Our services are confidential. We're not connected to any medical system, including Michigan Medicine. So sometimes people say, hey, Alex, can you get my notes from my doctor? And that's not something I can do. We're not connected. So we are confidential and private in that way. There's no charge for our services. And then we have our contact information. If there's a way to send out the slides to everyone afterwards, I can do that so you have the contact information. And then I think it's always nice to be able to put faces and names together. So this is our staff. You can see our counselors, and then if anyone did ever reach out to us, you'll likely interface with Matthew or Bridget, who can help with scheduling. Okay, so getting into the content here, just getting started here. So I want to talk about stress. And I want you to think, as we go through this today, I want you to take away pieces that are going to be helpful to you. So I want you to think about, what's going to be a good fit for me. Everything I go over might not always resonate with you, but the goal of today is to help you figure out, this really sounded like a good idea for me, or this might be something that I can try. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we get started. But just as we start to think about stress, one theory of stress talks about this idea where our initial assessment of the demands is a mismatch with what we think we can do. So there might be a situation, we assess the situation, and then we also assess our own abilities, and we decide, that seems a little bit outside of my reach, or that might be a bit much. And so when there's that incongruence, this type of idea says that's when we experience stress. Now this is one idea about stress. There are other ones out there, but just to get our minds thinking about how do we think about stress. Another piece that I'm not going to be talking about as much today, but is really important, is we know there are a lot of different ways that stress occurs, a lot of different contributors. We can talk about systemic things, we can talk about organizational things. There are a lot of factors that influence our stress experience. Today we're going to be focusing on things that are in your control and what can you do? How can you manage some of that stress? So that will be our focus or our lens for today. Just as we're getting started, I'm curious to hear from you all. How do you know when you're stressed? What are your signs of stress? And so you can think about that from different levels. What are the emotional experiences you have? Do you notice anything in your body? Physiological changes, maybe physical changes in your mind. Does your mind kind of start racing? Do you have different thoughts that go through your head? Or behavioral. And what we mean by that is, what are you doing? What are your actions? Maybe you fidget, maybe you pace. So I'm just curious, what are some of the signs of stress that you all notice when you're feeling stressed? And feel free to...
I just do avoidance, so I'll go make a jigsaw puzzle.
Avoidance, yeah, a very common one. So rather than maybe feeling stressed, you go do a jigsaw puzzle. And sometimes that can be helpful, but again, avoidance is something we talk about in terms of kind of stress management and whether it's helping us get to our goals or not. That's a great example. Anyone else? Yeah.
Like a tightening of my chest.
Chest tightness, yeah. So that's one that people can feel. Of course, you always want to have that checked out if you haven't had that before. But again, that tension in the body is something that is pretty common. I know for me, I oftentimes feel that tension in my neck. So if people feel that tension, oftentimes it can radiate, neck to shoulder, in the head. That's how we get tension headaches, is one way that we can feel that stress. Yes, thank you. Yeah, craving sweets. So sometimes when we feel stressed, maybe we found different foods that help feel us, that help increase that sense of comfort. And so maybe that might be something that we do as well. Yes.
I was going to say sleep, but I'm going to ask you if you could stay closer to the mic because you're kind of going in and out a little bit.
Yeah, thank you.
Or maybe just pull it down.
Is that any better? Okay. So I think I heard sleep. So maybe we sleep more when we're feeling stressed. It's one of the things that we might do. Okay. Thank you. So when I work with people on stress management, there are a couple metaphors that I like to use. The first one is you can't pour from an empty cup. That one is probably pretty common. How many people have heard of that one before? You can't pour from an empty cup. So the idea behind this is that if we think about that cup like our energy, if that cup is full, we have energy, we might be able to respond to stressful situations, with greater focus, with greater ability, with greater attention. We just have more to give. Now, if we're trying to respond to a stressful situation and our cup is empty, then we're already operating from a place of depletion. We're already trying to manage our stress, fix a problem, cope with something difficult without really having any resources at that moment. And so the idea around you can't pour from an empty cup is we want to help you keep your cup full or at least being refueled throughout the day. So that as you go throughout your day, you're doing things that take care of yourself, and you're doing things that help you feel energized or manage that stress, so that you're not facing things from a place of depletion, a place of emptiness. So that's the metaphor for you can't pour from an empty cup. And so when we talk about stress management, these things that you can do to manage stress can help refill your cup or can help it from decreasing so quickly. The other metaphor I like to use is this idea of checking our speed. How fast are we going? How fast is our mind going? Are we fidgeting? Just kind of like, where is our body at? And when we think about this metaphor, I like to pull in the idea of it's easier to stop a vehicle going 5 miles an hour than one going 60. Same with our stress levels. If we can catch our stress levels when they're starting to pick up, when they're starting to activate, we can intervene, and it takes less energy to calm down, to relax, to redirect, than if we catch them when we're going 60 miles an hour. And so one of the best ways to really start to manage stress is through self-monitoring. Okay. So as I said, as you listen to today's presentation, there are some questions I want you to reflect on. So one is, how would I feel if I were to try this strategy or try this technique? And is it something I'm willing to do? Which tools seem the most helpful for me? So again, with this theme of building your own stress toolbox, maybe you're rebuilding one, maybe you're adding tools, but really having some strategies that you can use when you feel stressed. And then the last piece is, what could I do or learn to do with some consistency? So when you think again about how do we keep our cups from getting empty, it's important to be doing these things consistently and routinely. We're not talking about managing stress at the end of our day when we're already, functioning on empty, and it's harder to really bring ourselves back at that point. So what's something that you could do with some consistency? Okay. So as we were saying, self-monitoring is one of the first places to start with stress management. Just knowing when you're stressed is important. So being able to catch those signs, being able to notice in your body and your mind that you're feeling stressed. You did a great job identifying some of those common patterns of what you might notice when you're feeling stressed, but this is where the tailoring comes in. So really knowing what are your signs of stress. These are different domains that you can think about. So again, the emotional domain, kind of the emotions that show up for you when you're feeling stressed. The physiological, so we talked about some of those, but things like fatigue. Maybe you notice some indigestion, maybe you have headaches. Cognitive or mind, so kind of like how are you functioning cognitively? Are you having difficulty concentrating? Are you not really kind of grasping things as much when you're in that state of stress? Behavioral, so just kind of what are you doing? What are your actions say or show? In addition to that, understanding your patterns. So maybe sometimes there are certain things that make you feel stressed and that you know about that ahead of time. Maybe there are different patterns in your stress where you notice that this, I feel more frequently stressed from this, but I feel a greater stress response to this. So understanding that difference between frequency and intensity. Really the first stage of managing stress is understanding when you're feeling stressed. Okay. So on that note, when you're checking in with yourself, and you're understanding, this is where I'm feeling my stress. A couple helpful questions that you can ask yourself, and I think this is really related and been really relevant during the pandemic, is what's in my control? This time period has brought about so much where people feel, and understandably, there are things that are outside of our control. And what we want to do is start to focus on what's in our control. And so one of the questions that you can just start off with is that basic piece of what's in my control, and really identifying specific things that are. Now, when we think about stress management, there are some different lenses or different, kind of avenues we can think about. One is a problem-focused approach. And so that's when you have something that you can directly impact. Is it something where you can, per se, fix the problem, or you can have some type of influence? It's like, there's a hammer and you have a nail. Those two things you can directly impact. But there are a lot of situations in life that we all know that you can't really impact what's going on directly. And those are really hard. At the same time, what this teaches us to do is to refocus that attention on, again, what is in our control. So maybe we can't change the situation in the way that we want, but maybe we can focus on how we're feeling. Maybe we can focus on that stress response and what are things that we can do to self-soothe ourselves or help ourselves in those moments. So a framework that we'll be thinking about with some of the strategies today, this comes from cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT for short if you've heard it. It's a fundamental treatment for a variety of different mental health conditions. And one of the main premises from it is that our thoughts, our emotions, and our behaviors are all interconnected, that they influence one another. So when we're going through some ideas on how to manage stress today, I'm going to focus in on thoughts. So what are some ways that we can help manage stressful thoughts? And then what are some behaviors that we can do or some actions we can take that help manage our stress? And with this theory then, what we're saying is that if the emotion, let's say, is we're feeling stressed or anxious or sad, is that when we intervene in one of these areas, so thoughts or actions, then it's going to have a rippling effect and impact the other. So that's some of the framework for how we're thinking about this. Okay. So one of the exercises that we can do today uses imagery. And this is a nice stress reliever in the sense that you can take a moment, you can do it at any point of your day, you can do it whenever you like, and you can really use imagery to help calm yourself. Meditation uses some imagery, you can use different variations of this, and we'll do a brief exercise today. The main idea behind this is that it's like you can take a mini vacation in your mind. So maybe you're feeling really stressed and you just need to disconnect for a moment. Maybe you find that your mind's really fixated on something. Maybe you feel some of that tension in your body. Well, what we can do is change what we're doing. So again, changing that action, changing our behavior, and that can then lead to a different experience with that stress in that moment. This can help with a lot of different experiences. So again, anxiety, stress, it can calm our mind. A lot of these kind of concrete stress tactics also help with things like lowering blood pressure, slowing our heart rate. So they can really create that sense of calmness in the body. So what I'd like you to do is we're going to do this together, and I'm going to walk you through an instructional exercise on using imagery-based relaxation. Before I have you close your eyes as you're comfortable, I just want you to think about a place that brings you happiness. It can be a place that you've been to, it can be a place you'd like to go, or it can be one that you make up. So again, anywhere that really kind of brings you peace or calmness. It could be the ocean, it could be the forest, maybe it's the city for you. Whatever it is, I want you to just take a moment and think about something in your mind and identify a location. Okay. Before we actually do the instructional exercise, I'd like you to think about some of the specifics about it. So we're going to have you channel your senses. And as you think about yourself in that location, I want you to think about what you see. So what's around you, your sense of touch, your sense of touch, maybe there's a wind or a breeze, what you're hearing, what you're tasting, maybe again if you're on the ocean there's kind of a taste to the air, and what you're smelling, if there's any aroma or anything distinct about this location. Okay. Now that you have thought about those things, we're going to put it all together, and we're going to do the exercise. So as you're comfortable, I invite you again to close your eyes, allow your body to relax in your chair, and begin by taking a few deep breaths, allowing yourself to be in this moment, breathing in and out slowly and comfortably at your own pace. I want you to picture yourself at the back of a theater standing, and on that screen is this location that you've created in your mind. Again, maybe a beach, or a forest, or on the lake, or on the water. And that scene is playing on the screen. Begin walking towards that screen, towards that location, getting closer to that image. Now you're about halfway to the screen, feeling closer to that location, closer to that peaceful setting. And now you're just about approaching the screen. I want you to walk into that image, walk into that location, and allow yourself to be immersed in that setting. What do you see before you? Maybe leaves blowing, waves crashing, taking in the different colors, the different sights. Maybe there are people, maybe there are animals, maybe it's just you. What do you hear? Birds, water. With your sense of touch, what does it feel like to be there? Really allowing yourself to be in this space. Maybe there's a gentle breeze caressing your skin. Maybe there's the sunlight warming your body. What do you taste? Is there anything in the air, anything in the space that sticks out to you? And what do you smell? Perhaps there's crisp autumn air. Maybe there's the smell of the sea. Just giving yourself permission to be in this space, taking it all in, and walking around there. Maybe feeling the leaves beneath your feet or the sand. And as you're here, allowing that stress and that tension that's in your body and in your mind to be released. While you're doing this, it's normal to have different thoughts come in, and gently redirecting your attention back towards this location that you've created. Enjoying that moment and enjoying this space. Okay. And as you're ready, gently opening your eyes and bringing yourself back in to our conversation here. Well, it got really quiet here, so I think people were going to those locations. What was it like for you to do this? Who would like to share? How many people found it hard? Imagery is a skill, and it again can take time. Yeah, so I see some hands. This is, again, something that takes time to practice, and so when I asked you that earlier question of what are you willing to try, this might be one of those things, if you have interest, that you practice and you can get better at as you do it. What were other people's experiences like?
I love doing those.
Okay, thank you. What do you like about them?
It focuses my mind
Yeah.
in a way, although I kept thinking, well, I'm going to tell where I was and all this stuff, but it does make me focus and think about senses.
Yeah. Yeah, great. So it focuses your mind. When you're focusing on something like this, if you're really attuned to it and redirecting your mind back towards this scene, is it's then hard to be stuck on whatever you were experiencing that stress around. Now, we're not saying it solves the stressor, right? But this is one where you can relax and reconnect and recenter yourself. Other people's experiences? How many people feel more anxious after doing it? Okay. How many people feel a little calmer? Okay. So maybe some people felt a little anxious, but I saw a lot of people feeling calmer. So this is an example of something that you can have in the back of your pocket that you can try, and that, again, you really can do anywhere. So most places you could take a few minutes and do this on your own, and something that you can practice. Okay. So some additional strategies that we won't go in today, but progressive muscle relaxation. So for those of you that have mentioned that tightness, that tension in your body when you're feeling stressed, PMR is a systematic tensing and releasing of muscle groups. And so what it does is it creates this, comparison and contrast where we can feel that tension in our body and then we can release it. It also can make us more aware of where we're holding that stress because we're having you really do a body scan and release that tension. Another type of stress reduction activity is diaphragmatic breathing. So this is, you might hear as deep breathing, belly breathing. It's used in a lot of different things, yoga, athletics, martial arts, birth classes, all sorts of things, and it helps really turn on the body's relaxation response. And so these are some other examples that can be helpful. We won't go through every activity today, but of course you can always reach out to us if you had interest to learn more about these. Okay. So next we're going to shift, and we're going to focus a bit more on thoughts. So that was one example of what you can do if you're feeling something in your body and how do we intervene on stress, for more of a behavioral level. This is one where we can intervene on stress more from kind of our thoughts. Okay. So oftentimes when we feel stress, we might think, here's the situation, and then there's my stress. The situation and my stress are really kind of one and one. But one of the things we can do to really kind of impact your stress response is to pay attention to what we're telling ourselves or what's going through our mind. Now, we're not saying that our thoughts are the only thing creating that stress, but what we are saying is that our thoughts can sometimes compound stress or lead to us having a stressful experience when maybe we're not quite in a place where that stress experience is needed or where it really kind of fits what's going on. And so with this one, I like to give the example where we'll talk about how our thoughts can influence what we're feeling and can influence, in this context, our stress experience. So how many people here drive and have ever been cut off while you're driving? Yeah. Might have happened on the way here, right? Most people, when I ask them this question, what's the first thought that goes through your mind? It's not something along the lines of, that is such a nice person. Usually we have something kind of akin to this, and I've heard all different types of responses in asking this question over the years. But it might be, wow, that person's not really nice, or what a jerk. And so when we have that thought again is connected to what we feel, and it's connected to our stress response. So what we want to start to do is we want to start to catch those different types of thoughts. So that initial thought of what a jerk when we get cut off really can fuel that emotion and really can keep us in a state or really kind of impact what we're going through in that moment. Now, we're not saying that getting cut off can't be a scary experience. It can be a lot of different things. But what we want to highlight is that the power of our thoughts is something where we can intervene, that we can really monitor and pay attention to what's going through our mind, and we have a choice of how we want to respond to those thoughts. So the first piece, as we said, is identifying that we're stressed. So we talked about, let's look at our signs. And this next piece, another strategy, is identifying what are unhelpful thought patterns that we might be telling ourselves. What are different types of tendencies that play out in our thoughts that might be impacting how we're feeling in that moment with our stress. And so if we take this same situation, what we're talking about then is, let's say you're driving, someone cuts you off, And we want to start to notice, where does our mind go? What's going through our mind in that moment? So what I'd like to do is review some different tendencies or patterns that we see in people's thoughts. This isn't specific to stress. These are things that, go along with anxiety, with sadness, with anger, with all sorts of different emotions. And the other thing about them is they're all really common. Most people have these different types of thoughts at some point or often. The key piece here then is, are we catching them, and are we acknowledging the impact that they have on us? So I'm going to go through a list of some common thought patterns that we see, and ones that I would encourage you to pay attention to and to catch for yourself. The first one's mind reading. And that one's pretty self-explanatory. It's when we assume that we know what other people are thinking. And so we take that as fact. So we might assume, thinking about the holidays, maybe it's, they really didn't like the present that I got them. But we have to pause ourselves and think, well, do we really know that? And so this is one thought tendency that we see people experience. Another one is fortune telling. So you predict the future. Oftentimes we're predicting negative things when we're in a state of stress. So I'm going to fail at this task might be an example of it. Or catastrophizing. So again, we believe that what's happened or will happen is going to be unbearable or just so crushing. And again, this is another tendency where we'd want you to catch. Is this mirrored in your thought process? Okay. Some other ones, labeling. So maybe we assign some type of global negative trait to ourselves or other people. So again, really, calling people names, kind of jumping to quick judgments. This would be labeling. Discounting positives. So this is another thought pattern or tendency we see. You claim, that the positives that have happened are not relevant or they don't count. So it might be, this person gave me a compliment, but they say that to everyone. So we really disqualify it or say it doesn't really matter. Or maybe we have some successes and we say those successes don't matter. They were so long ago, or for whatever reason, those successes don't matter. It was that was easy for me to do. So again, these are different ways in which we might discount our thoughts that can lead to more stress or whatever that emotion might be. And then negative filter. Focusing on negatives and not really noticing the positives. So it might be overly focusing on something you didn't do, but really not paying attention to all the wonderful things you did do. Now, when people hear these for the first time, some of the questions they ask are, well, Alex, this sounds like some of these are pretty similar, and you're right. So there is a lot of overlap, but there is nuance. And so, for example, discounting positives is an intentional discounting. You're recognizing the positive, but you're minimizing it. Negative filter is one in which you're just not really seeing it. You're not hearing it, or you're not really thinking about it. It's less important to me that you understand and identify each one specifically, but more that we learn to catch that our mind is doing something in this moment, that our thoughts are carrying some type of tendency that probably isn't serving us. And so with these ideas here, the main piece is, can I understand and can I see that my thoughts are characterized by some type of tendency here? Okay. Some other ones, so overgeneralizing, maybe taking one instance and then we extrapolate, so we think that that's always going to happen. All or nothing thinking, also known as black and white thinking, where things have to be this way or that way. So it's I did well or I did terribly, I failed or I passed, that was a good party, that was a terrible party, whatever it is, but where we only see things kind of as this way or that way. And then should statements. So those ones are pretty common. How many times do people say, I should have done this or I shouldn't have done that? Now, when we think about that, that's one of those words that we want you to catch. Same thing with must and mustn't, is that usually these types of thoughts aren't really helping us in that moment. And so we can be self-compassionate and reframe that in a way. Okay. So I'm curious, we went through some thought patterns there. Which one stood out to you? And are there any that you noticed that, you experience? I know I have a lot of should statements where I think I should have done this sooner, I should have done that. Other ones stand out to people? I think I heard all of them. And that's pretty common, that we can experience a lot of these different types of thoughts. And that, again, what we want to work towards is catching them. Because as we catch them, then we can intervene there. Okay. So then the question is, well, what do we do with this? Once we catch these, what do we do? And so what we want to work on then is replacing those unhelpful thoughts. We want to work on making sure that when those come up, that we're not just letting them sit, that we're responding to them in some way. And so what that might look like then is, again, you have the situation, you have the thought, and you catch it, and then we replace it with something else. So we're not saying that you're going to change that initial thought. What we're saying is that when you catch that initial thought, we can then respond to it a bit differently, and that can lead to a different experience. So going with our driving situation, let's say someone cuts you off, and you're okay. So again, you're safe after this. And you have the thought, well, maybe they have an emergency. Do you feel the same way after that thought as compared to what a jerk? See some head nods? So this illustrates this connection between our thoughts and our emotions. And so we can intervene and catch those thoughts. We can then also address that stress or that emotion that we're feeling. Okay. So here are some concrete ways that you can really work to change those thoughts or replace them. These are questions that you can ask yourself, when you're feeling stressed, if you're feeling anxious, if you're feeling down. And there are a lot of different questions out there, but I selected a few that I think are just kind of good starting points. So again, to create a more helpful thought, like maybe that person has an emergency, these are some of the questions. So what is the evidence that my thought is true? So we don't have to accept our thoughts as facts. We can challenge them, we can push back against them. What would I tell a best friend or a loved one? Oftentimes the compassion we show people that we're close with, or really anyone, isn't the same that we show ourselves. And so this really pushes us towards thinking, well, if this happened to someone else or to someone I really care about, would I be talking to them the same way that I'm talking to myself? Another one is simple as, what's a more helpful thought? Maybe it's not helpful to really think that thought or dwell on it. So what might be more helpful in that situation? And then lastly, one is, what's most likely to happen? Sometimes we can really get stuck on thinking that something's going to happen, but we're getting, our mind is kind of overweighting what's possible with what's probable. And so thinking about what's most likely to happen is another good question here. Okay. So that's more of some strategies on how do we manage stressful thoughts, how can we intervene and manage what's going through our mind. These next slides talk about just kind of practices, day to day. What are some things you can do that we know help with stress, just in terms of how we're functioning, how we're doing day to day. So of course, sleep. Sleep is a common one people talk about, and we know that sleep has so many benefits and really is connected to so many parts of our body. So oftentimes, one of the first places to start with sleep is having a regular bedtime. There are whole treatments that are focused on helping people with sleep, and one of the first things is really, can we establish a routine bedtime, going to bed and waking up at the same time. Having a pre-sleep routine, so doing some things that help you unwind. So oftentimes, you don't want to be watching the news right before you go to bed. Most people don't feel calmer after the news. So doing something that helps you relax and unwind before sleep is important. This also includes things like, if you're drinking alcohol, drinking caffeine, being mindful of that and understanding your body. There are general recommendations, not to have caffeine hours before you sleep. That alcohol can actually, it leads to poorer quality sleep. So being mindful of, what you're putting in your body, not having big meals before you go to sleep. other important pieces just in establishing healthy sleep routines that can help with stress. If you're having sleep difficulty, limiting and avoiding naps, that's something that you can talk to your doctor about. They'll have specific recommendations. This is more so, if people are having significant sleep difficulty, that's one of the things that they'll mention. But you can always talk to your providers about that too, to see what they recommend for you. Okay. Some other basic things that we want to have you pay attention to. So a lot of this stuff might be kind of more general knowledge, but it's important to check in on. If you're feeling stressed or you're not doing as well as you'd like to be, are you eating regularly? Are you fueling your body? Are you getting nourishment? Are you exercising or doing some type of activity? Whatever that is for you, whatever is a good fit. But we know that exercise and routine exercise really helps with mental health. There have been studies that show the right amount of exercise is equivalent to an antidepressant medication. So again, that has a really big power here for our mental health. And taking breaks, knowing your limits. Whether you're doing another job, you're volunteering, you're doing stuff around the house, playing with grandkids, whatever it is, making sure that you pace yourself. That again, we want to make sure that you're not getting that cup all the way empty and then trying to manage stress. So for these last slides, we're going to talk about some of those overarching ideas. When you're thinking about different tools and how to use those in your day-to-day life for stress management, I want you to think about some principles here. So one is that your goals for managing your stress, your goals for taking care of yourself, we want to be modest. You don't want to go from, let's say, if you're going for a half an hour walk, saying, I'm going to go for a 4-hour walk tomorrow. We want it to be something that is, an understandable next step for you. It's oftentimes helpful to make your goals behaviorally anchored. What we mean by that is connect them to an action. So rather than saying I'm going to exercise more, make that action specific. I'm going to walk 3 times a week, or I'm going to eat a salad 3 times a week, rather than just saying something like I'm going to eat healthier, or I'm going to exercise more. Using a variety of techniques. So keeping in mind that, sometimes you need a hammer, sometimes you need a screwdriver, sometimes you need duct tape. So keeping attuned to what is going to be most helpful for you in that moment. And experimenting, so understanding kind of what's going to work for you here. And that relates to, I think, this piece on flexibility. So again, you want to be flexible in how you manage your stress. That, if the first thing doesn't work, it doesn't mean that you can't then try something else next. And then intervening early. So not waiting until the end of the day. If we only manage our stress at the end of the day, that's when it's hardest to do. We've really kind of let it build up throughout the day. Maybe we're more activated. Maybe we're probably more tired at the end of the day. So really working to intervene and do things for yourself throughout your day and not just at the end. Thinking about your stress management both in terms of short-term and long-term. So again, doing the imagery-based relaxation I think is a great strategy, but it's not going to create systemic change in your day if that's the only thing you're doing for stress management. So thinking about what are things that you can do short-term and what are things you can do long-term. So short-term might be like the imagery or the deep breathing, and long-term might be more planning. It might be creating structural changes in your life. It might be taking vacations or doing things that are more out of the ordinary for you that you enjoy. So really thinking about it at both those levels. And then lastly, being your own scientist. So we've been talking about this idea of experimenting. Do some of your own experiments. Think about, if I do this when I'm feeling stressed, does this help? If I do this, throughout my week, do my stress levels feel a bit better? So really allowing yourself to try some different things and paying attention to how that goes for you. Okay. So moving forward, I want to invite you just to think about for a moment, a practice or a strategy that you like to try. And then thinking about if there's an obstacle that would arise. So when you're thinking about implementing some new behavioral goals or trying something new, thinking about are there some obstacles that might come. So let's say, for example, with some people I work with, they'll want to try deep breathing. And they'll say, well, I don't really know when I can do this. And so they think about the obstacle of planning and time. And so they might then have a reminder on their phone or have a note in their office or in their car that says, remember to do your deep breathing or remember to slow down. And so when you're thinking about starting something new, make sure that you're thinking about obstacles as well that could prevent you from reaching your goal. Okay. Well, thanks for having me here. I would love to hear all your questions and anything that you're wondering about, or if there's anything that we went over that would be helpful for me to explain a bit differently, I'm happy to do that as well. I think there's a microphone going around here.
Good afternoon. I definitely will be calling your office number after this presentation. And I have used your services in the past when I worked at the U. It used to be 6 short-term sessions. Has that been reduced, or does that not include the evaluation session?
That's a good question. So I will say that I started in the past couple of years. So if before that there were 6, it wasn't something that I was as aware of. Right now it's 5. Now there is some flexibility at times, so it's not necessarily hard and fast. But generally we're working with people for about 5 sessions, and part of that goes down to trying to figure out kind of what's the best fit for that person. If let's say the concern or whatever's going on, the person might benefit from a longer term type of support, then we want to make sure that we're getting them connected to something that's going to really best meet their needs.
And do you have evening hours?
The question was, do we have evening hours? There are some evening hours, but most appointments are between 9 to 5.
Thank you, that was helpful. It's so interesting because I've been retired since 2011, but it is amazing to me how I feel stressed despite the fact that I'm retired. I mean, I do have responsibilities, but I think my question, or maybe it's a comment, or maybe it's both, is that I do think that we have almost an epidemic of busyness. You know what I mean? That people, and I think that I'm very much a victim of that, in terms of like, I have my list, of things to do, and I have it every day, and one of the things I'm taking away is that I actually need to take breaks during the day from this self-imposed busyness, if you will. So I don't know if you have any comments about that, but that's just a reaction I had.
Yeah, thank you very much. So certainly, I think there is definitely a sense that we should always be doing something, that things go quite quickly these days. If you look at your phone, you're getting like 50 notifications in an hour. So there always is kind of like this push, I think, towards doing something or something's happening. And it is important to take breaks. You think about if we never took a break, where would that leave us? And so this idea of pacing yourself, of making sure that you schedule breaks, and knowing when you reach that point that it's important to take a break. And I would actually say knowing when to take a break before you reach the point of having to take one is most important. So that you're not overdoing it, so that you're not exhausting yourself. But certainly I think culturally there's a lot of built-in structure that kind of just keeps us going on to the next thing, to the next thing, to the next thing. And certainly if you all were working in the university setting, we know that happens there too. So that could be something that's carried on as well. Yeah, but great point.
Can you hear me without the mic? I would add to
No,
that.
hey, where is
Oh, good.
Thank you. What comes to my mind with your busyness question is it's also easy to compare yourself to everyone else and then going, they're doing it, why can't I stay on top of this?
Yeah, yeah. So definitely, yeah, comparisons usually are not our friends, and those would be, a lot of those thoughts probably could be captured in some of the unhelpful thought patterns that we were talking about. So if you find yourself, like, that could be a should statement, right? I need to keep going, or I should be doing more, I should have gotten to this. So again, if we look at some of those thought tendencies, those patterns can really be fueling some of that.
My question is about other people's stress. We work on our own with these methods, but what about, for example, a mother who has a crying baby in a grocery line, or as adults when we're with a committee of people and one person is dominating, or maybe one person is upset with you and they start yelling, then how do you deal with someone else's stress? You can't just go. So that's my question.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. A great question. So I think we're talking about kind of like when other people are the originator of, of the stress. And depending on the situation, that can, lead to a lot of different conversations, a lot of different avenues. I mean, you can think about the idea of setting boundaries. You can think about what's in your control and not in your control. So oftentimes, if I'm working with someone and let's say that one of their challenges is they work with a difficult person, then we might talk about, what are things, how can you communicate in a way that helps you get your needs met? What are ways that you can set boundaries? And again, each situation's different. What are you doing to take care of yourself? So you have to enter a space that is going to be stressful for you. What are you doing to prepare for that ahead of time? What are you doing after that meeting or after that interaction? And even during it, with a lot of meetings taking place virtually, there have been times where I work with people and we talk about, well, what can you do during the meeting? Maybe you can have a calming scent, like a candle going while you're at home during that meeting. Maybe you can have something that maybe you're drinking your favorite beverage, like a latte or something. But really think about that self-care of how you're taking care of yourself during those stressful interactions. And then at the same time, kind of the bigger picture of, is this something that is connected to your values? Is it something that you want to, keep doing? Is it worth it to you? And kind of making those, again, every situation is different, but figuring out your own kind of recipe. Is this something I want to keep doing? Am I getting from it enough that I want to keep going? Or do you give yourself permission to decide to do something different?
Quick one. Are the sessions in person or can they be Zoom?
Right now, our services are Zoom and over phone. And it's been actually quite nice because a lot of people, the commuting and finding parking on U of M campus, and particularly, with faculty and staff when they're there and having to move their vehicles and then go back, it's cut out a lot of back and forth and a lot of additional time that they get back in their day.
Out of curiosity, which of your 5 senses, so to speak, where you get the most bang for your buck to get relaxation?
Yeah, that's a great question. I actually don't know the research-based answer on that. But in terms of kind of just thinking about that out loud, I would say it's probably individualized. So depending on what's most helpful to you is what I would encourage. Probably for the imagery, the first thing is just to try to envision where you're at. So again, kind of seeing that space. You can have if you have a photo of it, so sometimes people will have like a photo of the place that they're envisioning and they can look at it beforehand. Other times, it's about really kind of recentering and calming yourself. So you could also have something like some calming music playing in the background, and that for some people might be another element to it, where if you can kind of create that that sound or that calming music in the background, that could be another layer to it that helps you kind of recenter and decompress. Okay, any other questions?
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you everyone for having me here today.
very much. That was very interesting. And remember that this will all be online. So the PowerPoint presentation will be on the website. So check it out. I mean, I think I may print it. So, but at any rate, thank you very much. Thank you very much. It was a great presentation and a perfect time of the year to do it. So thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
And again, refreshments are in the back before our next program, so please enjoy yourself. And again, sponsors are all over there to answer questions as well. Thank you.